All right, good morning, everyone. Happy Thanksgiving. I know that most people probably don't celebrate Thanksgiving that are watching, but being that you're not American, but all of you know what it is. You know, most of our friends that work on cruise ships, you know more about American holidays than most people because you always hear people talking about it. You know, I always hear people talking about the Super Bowl and things like that, and it's always funny to hear people from all over the world talking about it and knowing about it just because they work on the cruise ships. And you know, when I think of Thanksgiving, I think of the word gratitude. Mike mentioned this topic yesterday. However, when I think of gratitude, reflection comes to mind. And you know, I'm not a person that is thankful or grateful just all the time. It takes me something to kind of get in the mood to become grateful, and I need to kind of get alone and reflect on things. That way I can be thankful. I can just kind of be negative. And you know, if you're like me, maybe it's going somewhere that kind of puts things in perspective for you. And for me, it's going into nature. I have spots throughout my whole life that I've always loved to go to. Whenever I was little, I would go in the backyard, I would sit on the trampoline with my dog and just think about all types of stuff, you know, like what do I want to do when I grow up, you know, all those big life decisions. Whenever I was in college, I went to a school that had a waterfall on its property, and I would sneak up to the top and sit up there on top of it. And I probably shouldn't say that online, but you know, you got to break a couple rules in college, right? So that was in college. You know, I lived in Vero Beach, Florida for a couple years, and my favorite spot there is this beautiful place on the river, and it's in the back of this park on the island, and it overlooks the river on the west side of the island, and you can see the sunset. And it's beautiful, and it's got a little gazebo right there. It's one of my favorite places in this whole world. I mean, it's absolutely beautiful right there, and that's a place I like to go. Now that I'm up in Cape Canaveral and in Brevard County, I just love going to the beach anywhere. So, you know, kind of having that special, beautiful place kind of helps you get to a place to where you can say, you know, I am grateful for this, and just kind of getting along is... you know, it just kind of does that for me. And the reason why I bring all this up is because they're in a special place today in the book of Numbers, the Israelites. You know, we've been walking through the Old Testament. We've been walking through the story of the Israelites and how God called his people, and the story of God's ultimate redemption of everything. And they're at this place of the Holy Land. They're 2 years into the wilderness, and spies go out. Mike talked about that yesterday, and they come back with this report. And they talk about Mount Hebron and all the great things that they had found there. And if you remember from Genesis chapter 13, Mount Hebron is where Lot and Abraham had split up. That's where they had gone their separate ways, and Lot took the best land, which I'm sure is where they got all this stuff, and Abraham went off the other way. Then Genesis 15, it's where Moses actually, at this mountain, he received God's covenant about this promised land. So this area that they're in, this is a big deal to all of these people. And actually all the way up in Exodus 17, you know, this is where Joshua battled the Amalekites, and Moses had to keep his arms raised to win the battle. And whenever his arms would get tired and they would fall, the Amalekites would start winning. And so Miriam and Aaron would hold his arms up and help him hold them up so that they would win the battle. And still the people grumble. Still the people say, this is not a God that we can trust. So if you would, open your Bibles to Numbers 14. We're going to be reading verses 13 through 25. So it's Numbers 13, Numbers 14, verses 13 through 25. So Numbers 14, verses 13 through 25. As you're turning there, I think this passage, ultimately, it has something we all deal with in it, on top of that. And it's the fact that we all have doubts. We all have struggles. We all have pain. And we're not thankful, or we're short-sighted in remembering what God has promised us. And so what we're going to do today is we're going to see what we do when we get stuck in our questions and our doubts and things like that. So let's turn to Numbers 14, and we'll look at verses 13 through 25. And this is what the word of the Lord says. I'm reading it in the NLT, New Living Translation. So this is what the word of the Lord says. It says, "But Moses objected. 'What will the Egyptians think when they hear about it?' he asked the Lord. 'They know full well the power you displayed in rescuing your people in Egypt. Now if you destroy them, the Egyptians will send a report to the inhabitants of the land, who have already heard that you live among the people. They know the Lord, that you have appeared to your people face to face, and that your pillar of cloud hovers over them. They know that you go before them in the pillar of a cloud by day and a pillar of fire by night. Now if you slaughter all these people with a single blow, the nations that have heard of your fame will say, the Lord was not able to bring them into the land he swore to give them. So he killed them in the wilderness. Please, Lord, prove that your power is as great as you have claimed. For you said, the Lord is slow to anger and filled with unfailing love, forgiving every kind of sin and rebellion. But he does not excuse the guilty. He lays the sins of the parents upon their children, and the entire family is affected, even children in the third and fourth generations. In keeping with your magnificent and unfailing love, please pardon the sins of these people, just as you have forgiven them ever since you left Egypt.' Then the Lord said, I will pardon them as you have requested, but as surely as I live, and surely as the earth is filled with the Lord's glory, not one of these people ever entered the land. They have all seen my glorious presence and my miraculous signs I performed both in Egypt and in the wilderness. But again and again they have tested me and refused to listen to my voice. They will never see the land I swore to give to their ancestors. None of those who have treated me with contempt will ever see it. But my servant Caleb has a different attitude than the others have. He has remained loyal to me. So I will bring him into the land he explored. His descendants will possess their full share of the land. Now turn around, don't go on toward the land where the Amalekites and the Canaanites live. Tomorrow you must set out for the wilderness in the direction of the Red Sea. So he sends them going out the opposite way. But I think there's three things in there that we see when we have questions, when we have doubts. And it's what Moses does. He appeals to his glory, his power, and his promise. And the first thing is God's glory right there. And it's in verses 13 through 16. And in verse 16, what do we see? It says Moses appeals to the Lord. Moses does not entertain what happened. You got to go back to yesterday. In verse 12, what did God say? God said, Moses, should I just wipe this whole nation out and just start over with you? And this whole response today is Moses responding to God right there. And he doesn't entertain God's offer. Moses doesn't. And what does he do? He pleads for the nation and love them despite of their rebellion. He's zealous for the glory of God. Verse 14, what does he say? He says, Egyptians will hear of it, that you brought these people from among them. Basically what he's saying is, Lord, don't give these nations a way to downplay your greatness. If you wipe all of these people out, they might say greater is man's sin and rebellion than your power. And then in verse 16, he reminds God, this is the land that you swore to them. This is the land that you promised. Moses goes back to God with God's own word. But does this mean that God forgot? Did God change his mind? No. It means that Moses understood the seriousness of these people's rebellion. We're to appeal to God's glory today, even when we're in times of doubt, because it will lead us to a place of understanding our dependence on God and the purpose of God's mission for us here on earth. And God's ultimate purpose for himself is to glorify himself. And so we get to be instruments in that process. When we doubt God, it is God's glory that reminds us of the fact that we can rest in his sovereign hands. It is God's glory that gives us a reason to be thankful, even though we don't understand, or maybe we're like the Israelites right here, and we're scared to move forward. We're scared to kind of take that next step. But the second thing is in verse 17 through 19. It's God's power. Moses asked God to let his power be great. And that's kind of confusing, right? What does he say? He says, Lord, prove that your power is as great as you have claimed. Like, they've seen him do miraculous things. Moses met God through a burning bush. Imagine that. And then he sees the power of God as God just protects him his whole life, but he sees him do all the plagues. Then he sees him crash the Red Sea and destroy the Egyptian army after God opened it up and it was dry and all the Israelites walked across it. And then he's been taking care of them day by day, night and day, by special acts and giving them food where they're not even having to go hunting or anything. God's daily taking care of them, and he says, hey, God, can you make your power as great as you claimed? It's like, what? So anyways, that's confusing because God doesn't wipe the inhabitants of the promised land away either. He could have done that as soon as they got there, but he doesn't do that. And Moses asked God to use his power by showing mercy and long-suffering to a rebellious Israel. And these are the same things that Moses said in Exodus 34. This is the second time that he's said these things. The second time he's brought this back to the Lord. And the Lord acts towards Israel according to who he declared himself to be in his word. And look how this rebellion, though, is working on Moses. I said that, Moses is asking God all these questions, but it's in a different spirit completely. Just a few chapters back, chapter 11, Moses is so fed up with the people that he wanted to die. He's like, God, kill me. I don't have a reason to live. I can't do this. But now he has become the intercessor of the people. He's zealous for God's glory. All he wants is what's best for the people, not for himself. He's looking for the best. God, fulfill your word for these people. He's changed his heart completely. And I think that's a great look forward to seeing what Paul has to say in 2 Corinthians, that God's power is made perfect in our weakness. And it's God's power that transformed Moses into being the leader that was dependent on him. And that's what it means to give ourselves to God's power, is to be dependent on God. And this is how we understand God's glory, but it's God's power that helps us go into action. It's kind of like God's glory should be our head knowledge, but it's God's power that moves us to act. And then the third thing, I think we see it in verse 20. It's this. Let me just read verse 20 over again, so it's at the forefront of your mind. And then the Lord said, I will pardon them as you have requested. What beautiful words to hear, right? I have pardoned you. Perfect words for rebellious people to hear, for a sinner to know and to understand. This is Moses' prayer that God moved to act in this way. Now, I'm not going to say that Moses changed God's mind. God's unchangeable. Moses didn't change God's mind. But it's Moses' prayer that God hears. And it's our prayers, especially in a time of doubt and fear, especially in a time like now when I'm sure people are fearful of, numbers of the virus are going up. Things like that are happening. There seems to be a second resurgence. Everybody's kind of poking holes in everything. The election seems weird. There's just so many things that just seem out of sorts, and nothing seems to be kind of normal right now. But it's the prayer of the faithful that matters. Moses' prayer, what does it do? It gives the nation hope. It tests their faith, and ultimately, it's where the nation finds rest in the fact that God desires to be with them, that they are his people. And that's the same thing for us today. Our prayers give us hope. They test our faith, and ultimately they give us that peace, because we're not just talking to somebody that's not there. We're talking to the God that created the world, created the universe, and that desires to have a personal relationship with us. We'll see more fully tomorrow the outcome of all their grumbling, but we do get to see what God does in verses 21 through 25. And what does he do? He says the oldest generation, you're going to have to spend another 38 years out in the wilderness, because they've already spent 2 at this point, making it 40 total, right? But God keeps his covenant with his people. There are consequences for actions, yes, but God keeps his promise to these people. And ultimately, we see God not just give his people the promised land as we look forward in the Bible. We see the book of Joshua as they clear out the promised land, or mostly clear out the promised land. See Judges, Ruth, and just keep going all the way through. But God gives them the promised land, and then what does he do? He gives them the promised one, the Messiah, Jesus Christ. And this time, God does not relent his wrath. No, when God gives us the promised one, he gave us Jesus Christ, it was his pleasure to crush himself being God, Jesus being God, on the cross as our substitute. And so we may not understand that truth completely. I mean, that the term for that is the hypostatic union. You just all got a seminary degree. But that Jesus was somehow 100% man and 100% God at the same time. We can't wrap our minds around that, but that's okay, because the hidden things of God we don't have to understand. That's what Deuteronomy 29:29 says, but I don't want to keep rambling on that. It's, maybe we don't understand those truths, and maybe you're saying that sounds weird. Why would God have to do that? But God is a just God, and his wrath had to be satisfied, but he took it upon himself in our place. And it's that hope, it's that faith that changed eternity for me, and it can change it for you. So I guess my question today is, as we're thinking about being thankful and gratitude and appealing to God in his glory and in his power and his promise, is will you trust those things? Even if you don't fully understand them. God, I don't know what you're doing in my life right now. I don't know what you're doing in my world right now, but I can trust you with it because you are God. Or will you be thankful that he not only provided a way to have a relationship with you through Jesus Christ's death on the cross, but he paid that price so that you could spend eternity with him. And so I hope you all have a wonderful Thanksgiving. I hope this season of Thanksgiving kind of brings your eyes to Christmas. That's right around the corner. I've looked around and I've seen all the Christmas stuff in stores. All the radio stations already playing Christmas music. But, I'm thankful today that this season of gratitude and thankfulness comes before, I think, the best season of all. And that's the season of celebrating that God's ultimate promise for us was Jesus Christ. And Christmas is celebrating God coming into human existence with us in that way, and entering our time to save us. So anyways, that's what I'm thankful for today. I hope that all of you get to see your family today. I hope that you have a good time. You soak that in. Have a wonderful day, and we will see you tomorrow. Same time, same place. And I think it's Jeff teaching tomorrow. So you'll get to see Jeff from Thailand tomorrow. All right, see ya.